Poland is preparing for possible war with Russia and has been boosting its defense capabilities since Moscow's war of invasion in Ukraine in 2022, War Infographics Telegram channel has reported. Overall, the NATO member Poland has ordered more than 8,000 missiles, 2,000 units of artillery, thousands of other equipment and weapons, since early 2022. Anticipating possible Russian invasion, Poland tripled its defense budget since 2022. Moreover, this year Warsaw will spend nearly 5% of its gross domestic product on defense, more than any other NATO member, including the United States. Sharing borders with both Russia and Kremlin's ally Belarus, Poland has been building its defenses there. In addition, Poland has been training its male citizens for the war. In 2025, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced in the parliament that by the end of the year, every adult male in the country must be trained in the event of the war. Moreover, Poland recently announced it was withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, a 1997 international treaty banning the use of land mines. Poland is not the only country fearing a Russian invasion. Earlier, Bild newspaper reported, citing unnamed European special services, that if the war in Ukraine ends on Kremlin's terms, Russia might send 800,000 troops to the borders of NATO, primarily to Finland, Norway, Poland, and the Baltic countries. Russia is already increasing its military presence in neighboring Finland that joined the NATO in April 2023. Satellite images show that hundreds of new military tents have appeared in the military unit in Kamenka, Leningrad region near Finland, and helicopters have been parked near a base near Murmansk.
The number of dead and wounded in the ranks of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war is already approaching 1 million, but this does not affect the attitude of most Russians to the war and does not encourage them to protest. This was stated in an interview with Glavred by military political observer of the information resistance group Alexander Kovalenko. The reason here is also in psychological moments. Even being in this capsule, a closed information space, Russians still hear about big losses. Even Z military sometimes talk about the real number of losses, complain that it is a disgrace. At this rate, we will soon run out. What, Kiev? We will soon run out Dnipropetrovsk, he points out. Kovalenko emphasized that modern Russian society is different from what it was in the late 80s and early 90s, when people went out to mass protests with Molotov cocktails and rebar in their hands. Today's Russians will not go out into the streets without a push from an influential internal force, primarily a security agency, because there is virtually no real political opposition in Russia. According to the expert, only if someone from the security wing is interested in a change of power, in particular in removing Putin, will a protest movement be launched, and the people themselves will never take to the streets. Russians are an amorphous, spineless mass. They need stimulation from outside or from within, and this stimulation can only be organized by a certain person or force that has power and influence, he concluded. In this case, the United States has assured European officials that Washington is prepared to impose sanctions on aggressor Russia that the Americans have promised to launch if the Kremlin refuses to end its war in Ukraine. The Trump administration's stance on Moscow is hardening, with some officials arguing that Putin is blocking peace. Bloomberg's report says that European officials are frustrated with Trump's stance on new sanctions against Russia. Trump needs to understand Moscow's lack of serious plans for peace, after which the US should take decisive action. According to journalists, Washington's position towards Russia has hardened. The White House considers Putin the main obstacle to a peace agreement. Moreover, journalists write that American officials, during meetings with Europeans in Turkey this week, expressed their readiness to launch sanctions against Russia after Moscow announced that it was sending a low-level delegation to the talks. I hope that next week we get some movement on this because Putin has not been able to come to the table. President Trump has made it clear that he is positive about sanctions. Our European allies are very supportive of him, and I think the moment is now, said Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democratic Party member. Some experts claim that Russian dictator Putin is refusing any negotiations in order to carry out some kind of summer offensive. In fact, this offensive has been going on since 2024, and although Russian generals have already reported to Putin that by the end of the summer, all the goals of the so-called SVO will be achieved, this is unlikely to happen. This was emphasized on the air of the Freedom TV channel by the head of military programs of the Center for Globalistics Strategy 21, Pavel Lakichuk. As for the Russians' summer offensive, the thing is that sometimes observers interpret terminology a little freely. What is meant is obviously summer as a period of more active actions in the strategic offensive operation that the enemy is currently implementing. Each season has its own characteristics for conducting military operations: winter, summer, autumn. Each season has its advantages and disadvantages. Yes, it is easier to attack in the summer, Lakichuk noted. According to him, in addition to this, the enemy's forces also play an important role. These are reserves, human and material resources necessary to continue the offensive. At the moment, the enemy does not have the resources to conduct a new offensive operation. That's why he continues the offensive operation that is being carried out in the Donetsk direction. I mean the broad front in the Donetsk region, starting from Chasov Yar, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, south of Pokrovsk and the Liman direction. These are all components of one operation. Enormous resources are being spent on them, both human and material, the guest of the broadcast said. He added the Russian military leadership is unlikely to be able to implement all the plans set before it. Of course, they can try, but again, where to get additional material resources for this? In addition, the Russian military leadership has already reported to the Kremlin dictator that the Russian army managed to make a turning point on the battlefield last summer. Now Putin expects that in 2025 his army will maintain success and end the war by achieving the goal of the so-called SVO. His generals are afraid to report to him that everything is not going according to plan. They are even more afraid of Putin than they are of the Ukrainians, said the head of the military programs at the Center for Globalistics Strategy 21.